My name is Margaret, and there are days when you don't expect anything life-changing to happen. You think it will be an ordinary day, appointments, small errands, the usual quiet routine, and yet, in the middle of something simple, a lesson arrives so gently that you almost miss it. That is what happened to me the day I went to the doctor and was treated like a person, not a patient. It began with a small appointment card resting on my kitchen table. I had placed it there the day before and tried not to think about it too much. As you grow older, appointments start appearing more often than celebrations. The calendar fills with checkups, tests, refills, and reminders. You become familiar with waiting rooms, paperwork, and the soft, polite voices that try to move you along quickly. The night before my appointment, I slept lightly, not because I was in terrible pain, but because my mind had learned to worry quietly. Worry is strange like that. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers at the edge of your thoughts, reminding you of things you can't control. I lay in bed listening to the house settle and tried to convince myself it was just a routine visit. Still, I woke earlier than usual, as if my body wanted to prepare for what my heart could not. That morning, the light came in gently through the curtains. I made my tea and sat by the window like I always do, holding the warm mug with both hands. Outside, the street was waking up. People were moving quickly, wearing coats, carrying their lives forward with the energy of those who do not have to count their steps. I watched them and felt my own pace, slower now, softer. I looked down at my hands. The skin was thinner than it used to be, the veins more visible, the small tremble sometimes present when I was tired, and I felt a familiar feeling, not self-pity, but a quiet awareness that age changes the way the world looks at you. Sometimes it looks at you with kindness, sometimes it looks at you with impatience, and often it looks right past you. When I finished my tea, I dressed carefully. Nothing fancy, just something clean and comfortable. I brushed my silver hair until it lay softly around my face. I checked my bag twice for my appointment card, my identification, and the list of medications I always carried now. It felt strange, being a woman who once carried lipstick and photographs and now carried documents and pill names. But life changes, and we change with it. The clinic was only a short drive away, but I left early. I have learned that being older means being cautious. You leave extra time in case your body decides it needs to move more slowly. You plan for delays. You prepare for the unexpected. When I entered the building, the familiar smell of disinfectant greeted me, sharp and clean. I signed in, sat down, and waited. Waiting rooms have their own kind of quiet, not peaceful quiet, but a quiet filled with tension and tiredness. People avoid eye contact. Some look at their phones. Some stare into nothing. Others hold papers and read them again and again as if the words might change. I sat in my chair and held my handbag on my lap like a shield. My heart wasn't racing, but it wasn't calm either. I could feel the small nervousness under my skin, a subtle flutter of uncertainty. It wasn't about the doctor exactly. It was about the feeling that comes with being examined, measured, and reduced to symptoms. That is the part that many people don't understand about aging. It isn't only the aches or the limitations. It's the way you slowly become a collection of concerns in other people's eyes. A blood pressure number, a joint problem, a medication list. You walk into a room and suddenly you are not Margaret anymore. You are a case. I had grown used to it. The nurse called my name, and I followed her down the hallway. Her steps were fast, her voice polite but distant. She checked my blood pressure, weighed me, asked the same questions I had been asked countless times. I answered automatically. I watched her write without looking at my face, and I felt myself shrinking slightly inside. It wasn't her fault. It was the system, busy, efficient, rushed. She led me into a room and told me the doctor would be in soon. Then she left, and the door clicked shut behind her. I sat on the examination chair, my feet dangling slightly, and stared at the posters on the wall. One showed a diagram of a heart, another showed the stages of arthritis. The room felt cold, even though the temperature was normal. I waited. And in that waiting, my thoughts grew louder. I thought about my husband, gone now, and how he used to come with me to appointments and squeeze my hand when I felt nervous. I thought about my children, busy with their own lives, loving me, but unable to slow down enough to always be present. I thought about the strange loneliness that can exist even when you are surrounded by people. Then I heard footsteps outside the door. A moment later, the door opened and the doctor walked in. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either. He had calm eyes and a face that looked like it had learned patience. He smiled as he entered, but not the practice smile of someone rushing through a schedule. It looked genuine, as if he entered the room and truly noticed me. He didn't start with the computer. He didn't immediately ask about symptoms. Instead, he looked at me, met my eyes, and said, "Good morning, Margaret. How are you feeling today?" Not what's wrong today, not what brings you in, but how are you feeling? It was such a small difference, yet it shifted something inside me. I hesitated because I wasn't used to being asked like that. Then I answered honestly, "I'm a little tired and I've been worried." He nodded slowly, as if my answer mattered. He said, "I understand. Let's talk about it. Take your time." And suddenly, the room didn't feel as cold. Because someone had filled it with something warmer than temperature. Respect. The doctor pulled his chair closer, not too close, but close enough to show that he intended to listen. He didn't stand above me with a clipboard like so many others had. He sat as if we were having a conversation, not an examination. I found myself speaking more than I planned. I told him about the heaviness I had felt in the mornings, about the way my body seemed to take longer to wake up, about the small aches that made ordinary tasks feel like work. But I also told him something I hadn't said to a doctor in a long time. I told him about my loneliness. It surprised me, even as the words left my mouth. Loneliness is not the kind of symptom you list on paper. It doesn't have a clear measurement. There is no test for it. And yet, it affects everything. It sits behind your breath, behind your appetite, behind your sleep. It makes your body heavier because your spirit becomes tired. When I mentioned it, I expected him to move past it quickly. Most people do. They nod politely, then return to what can be measured. But the doctor didn't dismiss it. He didn't rush. Instead, he paused and said gently, "That's important, Margaret. Loneliness can feel like pain, and it deserves attention too." Those words nearly broke me, not because they were dramatic, but because they were simple and true. He spoke as if my emotional experience was just as real as my physical one, as if I wasn't silly for feeling it, as if my heart mattered as much as my blood pressure. I blinked hard to keep tears from falling. I didn't want to appear fragile. Older people learn to hide emotion because the world tends to treat it like weakness. But his calm expression told me I didn't need to hide. He asked me questions, but they weren't rushed. He didn't interrupt. He didn't type while I spoke. He looked at me, listened, and nodded in quiet understanding. I felt something in my chest loosen, like a tight knot slowly untying. Then he turned slightly and asked, "Tell me about your days. What do they look like?" The question felt strange. I had grown used to being asked about symptoms, not about life. But I answered. I told him about my mornings by the window, my tea, my quiet house. I told him how I tried to keep busy, small chores, short walks, reading, but how the days sometimes felt too long. I told him how I didn't want to bother my children because they had their own lives. I told him how I smiled on the phone and said I was fine, even when I felt empty. He listened without judgment. When I finished, he didn't offer quick solutions. He didn't say, "You should get a hobby," or "just join a group," as if loneliness can be solved like a puzzle. Instead, he said softly, "I'm glad you told me. It takes courage to be honest about that." Courage. No doctor had ever used that word with me. He then explained my health concerns calmly, in a way that didn't scare me. He pointed at the chart, but he didn't speak as if I were incapable of understanding. He explained things clearly, and when I asked questions, he answered with patience rather than impatience. That alone felt like medicine. At one point, he said, "We'll take care of your body, but we'll also take care of you." The difference between those two things is huge. So many times in life, older people feel like they are being maintained rather than cared for. They feel like someone is simply keeping them functional. But being cared for is different. Being cared for means being seen. The doctor asked if I had support at home. I told him I managed on my own, but that some days were harder than others. He nodded thoughtfully. Then he did something that surprised me even more. He asked, "Margaret, what matters to you right now?" I looked at him confused. I asked, "What do you mean?" He smiled gently. "What do you want your days to feel like? What gives you peace? What makes you feel like yourself?" No one had asked me that in years. When you grow older, the world mostly asks what you need physically, food, medicine, transportation, but rarely does anyone ask what you need emotionally, what makes you feel human. I thought for a moment, then I said quietly, "I want to feel useful. I want to feel connected. I want to feel like I still belong somewhere." He nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. He said, "You do belong, simply. And you matter. Your life matters." Those words hit me like warm sunlight. I felt my throat tighten, and this time tears did fall, small and quiet. I didn't wipe them away immediately. I let them exist. The doctor didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't rush me. He simply handed me a tissue and waited. After a moment, he said, "Margaret, I want you to know something. You are not just a patient in my schedule. You are a person with a whole story, and that story deserves respect." I think that was the moment I truly understood why this visit felt different. He wasn't treating me like a problem to solve. He was treating me like someone worth meeting. When the appointment ended, he didn't stand and turn away quickly. He wrote down instructions in clear handwriting and explained them again, slowly, making sure I understood. Then he added something else, not medicine, not a prescription, but a suggestion that felt like kindness shaped into practical form. He recommended a community program for seniors, not in a dismissive way, but as an invitation. He said, "Even if you go once, it might help you feel less alone." He also said, "And if you ever feel overwhelmed, tell me. Don't carry it silently." When I left his office, I felt different. Not cured, not magically healed, but lighter, as if someone had placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and reminded me that I was still part of the world. I walked through the clinic hallway and noticed my posture had changed. My steps were still slow, but my heart felt steadier. And as I stepped outside into the daylight, I realized something profound. Kindness can heal in ways medicine cannot. And that realization stayed with me long after I returned home. The sun outside was soft, and the street looked the same as it always did, but something inside me had shifted. I carried my papers and notes into the house, placed them neatly on the table, and then stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet. The quiet was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy. I moved toward the kitchen and put the kettle on, as I always do. The familiar sounds, the click of the switch, the gentle rumble of heating water, comforted me. Yet now those sounds didn't feel like the only voices in my day. I could still hear the doctor's words echoing in my mind, not as medical instruction, but as a reminder of my humanity. You are not just a patient. You are a person with a whole story. It's strange how a sentence like that can settle into you like warmth. I didn't realize how much I had been carrying the feeling of being reduced to an age, reduced to a set of symptoms, reduced to a number on a chart. I had grown used to it because it seemed normal, because it happened everywhere, at clinics, at pharmacies, even sometimes in the way strangers spoke to me in public. "Slow down, dear. Sit here, Grandma. Let me do it." People often mean well, but their kindness sometimes carries a hidden message. You are fragile. That day, my doctor's kindness carried a different message. You are whole. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking more deeply about dignity, not the kind that comes from pride, but the kind that comes from being treated with respect. Dignity is quiet. It isn't loud or demanding. It is the simple feeling that you are still allowed to exist fully, even as you age. And I realized how often older people are deprived of that without anyone noticing. We are spoken over, we are rushed, we are handled rather than heard. And sometimes, after enough years, we stop expecting to be treated like full human beings. We accept it. We shrink ourselves to fit what others expect. But I didn't want to shrink anymore, not after being seen so clearly. One afternoon, I gathered enough courage to attend the community program the doctor had mentioned. I almost didn't go. I stood at the door with my coat on, hand on the knob, and doubt whispered that it would be awkward, that I would feel out of place, that it would be easier to stay home where everything was familiar. But then I remembered the doctor saying, even once might help you feel less alone. So I went. The room wasn't glamorous, just simple chairs, warm lighting, and people with faces that carried the same mixture of experience and quiet hope that mine probably carried too. A volunteer greeted me kindly, not in a pitying way, but in a welcoming way. They asked my name, they listened when I answered, and suddenly I felt the smallest crack in the loneliness I had been living with for so long. It wasn't magic, it wasn't instant friendship, but it was something. I sat down beside an older woman with a gentle smile. We spoke about small things at first, weather, tea, the discomfort of certain chairs. Then she told me about her grandchildren, and I told her about mine. We laughed softly at how fast life moves when you're not looking, and as we spoke, I realized how hungry my heart had been for simple conversation. That night, when I returned home, I didn't feel exhausted. I felt warm. The doctor had been right. Loneliness can feel like pain, and connection, even in small doses, can feel like relief. I continued seeing that doctor for routine visits, and each time he greeted me the same way, like I mattered. It wasn't a performance, it was consistent, and consistency, I learned, is one of the most powerful forms of respect. Anyone can be kind once, but being kind again and again, that is character. One day, during a follow-up visit, he asked, "How have you been feeling since we last spoke?" And I answered honestly, "Better, not because my problems disappeared, but because I don't feel invisible anymore." He smiled, and in that smile I saw something that made me hopeful for the world, the belief that caring for people is not only about fixing them, it is about honoring them. Now, when I think about that appointment, I realize that the doctor didn't do anything extraordinary by medical standards. He didn't perform a miracle. He didn't change my life with medication alone. What he did was something far rarer. He respected me. He gave me time. He gave me dignity. And that gave me strength. If you are listening to my story right now, I want you to remember this. No matter your age, you deserve to be treated like a person. Your feelings count. Your story counts. Your life counts. You are not a number. You are not an inconvenience. You are not a burden. You are human. And sometimes one person seeing you properly can remind you how to see yourself again. Today I'm sitting by my window with my tea, sunlight warming my hands. The world outside is moving as it always does, but inside my home there is a softer kind of peace. I look at my reflection in the glass, silver hair, gentle lines, eyes that have survived and still believe, and I let myself smile. Not because everything is perfect, but because I feel respected, because I feel seen, because I remember that I am still a person, not just a patient.